All right. Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts and get ready for an adventure into the world of privacy coins, where our guest is the ultimate Monero maestro, a man who can turn blockchain jargon into a delightful dinner conversation, the crypto whisperer, who can make even the most complicated algorithms sound like a bedtime story. He's here to take us on a journey through the mysterious and magical world of Monero, while putting a smile on our faces. Please give a warm welcome to the one and only and charming and charismatic host of Monero Talk, Douglas, privacy pioneer Tuman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. Wow, I don't know if I could live up to that introduction. I feel like you should be on my show, to be honest, man. You are the dude. Just learning about you in the pre-conversation. Obviously, I had heard about Volturo, but I didn't realize you got into Bitcoin in 2010.
Yeah. I mean, I feel really blessed. Although, my gray hairs will tell a very different story of the stresses of this roller coaster.
Downs. Yeah.
But Bitcoin is my first love. It's really such an amazing technology that spawned everything that we know of as in terms of fintech. We didn't even hear that term fintech before Satoshi's white paper. It really created a renaissance in the conversation of what money is around the dinner table, and I think it was so timely because we were heading towards CBDCs anyway. But just they just didn't know how to do it because they become these huge honeypots that if there's a hacker in there, they could destroy the entire economy. So they needed some way to secure it. And the blockchain is really was the answer to that. But it's a total bastardized, disgusting version that they'll create, which is really sick and probably one of the largest threats to our freedoms and everything our grandfathers and forefathers fought for, the freedoms that we enjoy today. This is why privacy, I think, is such an important conversation, and why I thought I'd have you on the show and discuss those topics.
Well, cheers, man. Yeah, I'm quite passionate about it, as I'm sure maybe you've seen. I don't know. Yeah, on my show. I got into Bitcoin. I was a late bloomer. I heard about it, but I never stopped to understand it. I just thought it was an attempt at digital cash, but it hadn't actually been achieved. I just thought it was just another centralized version. Because I was very interested in that concept, right? I was kind of waiting for digital cash. But Bitcoin, I was just like, whatever, it's probably it's going to get taken down. It's whatever. So kind of missed that boat. And then Dogecoin came out in 2013. And I was like, I missed the whole Bitcoin pumporama. Let me see if I could turn $50 into $5,000. And I bought $50 worth of Doge.
Yeah.
Christmas Eve 2013, I woke up the next day, it was all gone, right? Because I stored it on an online wallet, right? I was like, this whole crypto, this is what cryptocurrency is. This is a horrible invention. Like, there's got to be more to it. There's got to be more to this.
Yeah.
And then that's what led me down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Read the Satoshi white paper, and I was like, oh my god, it's decentralized. And then I was like, a BTC Maxi. I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Until I actually went to start using it. And so I started onboarding my friends and my family. I was very excited about it. I was a BTC Maxi, right? It's going to revolutionize the world. But as I'm like sending them transactions, I'm like, and like, look, you can look it up on the blockchain, so you got it. And like, as I'm there explaining to them, I'm like, it's just I don't know. Is that going to work where everybody can see everybody else's transactions? Like, I get why it needs to be on a ledger.
Yeah.
The fact that it's a transparent one. That anybody can view and effectively surveil, I think is a major issue. And then so that's how I found my way into Monero. I was looking for the solution to that problem, and Monero was being worked on at that.
Well, it's not only you, man. I've talked to quite high up bankers in the banking, in the legacy system, and said, why haven't you brought Bitcoin in? Like, why are you doing stuff with Bitcoin and using it as a settlement layer? What's going on? And pretty much, I heard it multiple times. They said, well, it's not private enough. We can't use it. It's not private enough. And it was a real sort of eye-opener into what the legacy system is actually after. They talk about anti-money laundering, this and that, but at the end of the day, they want a big fat eye on what's going on, but they don't want everyone to have that eye.
They want to own that ability and be the only ones with the ability. I do think with Bitcoin, it's a problem, right? It is open to where anybody can peer into it. But I think those with the most resources, which are states, will be able to outcompete anybody in that sector and have an advantage over everybody else, given that they can perfectly surveil all transactions. And yeah, you make a good point. It's not just about Joe Schmo wanting, not wanting people to see how he's spending his money or whatever, worried that the government is peering into his transactions. It's that businesses expect to be able to transact privately. That's a big part of how business works and how capitalism works. It's what allows people to compete against each other. So it's just so essential to a money system for it to be default private with the ability to give people a view into it if you so opt into it. But to be default transparent leads to many issues. And so I don't like that Monero has been put into this category of privacy coin. Or even as this category has been created. I just see it as fundamental to a true cryptocurrency, that it needs to be private. So one that isn't, I don't think is really living up to what a true crypto is really meant to be. And yes, I think privacy is a fundamental human right, and I'm very passionate about those issues. But even ignoring those concepts, I think it's fundamental to it functioning as cash, as money, and it very much plays into the security of the network. So it creates a system that can't easily be surveilled or co-opted or censored.
Yeah. It's fascinating because a lot of people will constantly say, well, it's for criminals. It's for criminals. And it kind of suffers from the same problem as when someone gets censored on Twitter, let's say, and they go, right, they get so impassioned about that censorship that they go off and create their own Twitter. And all that happens is you silo that type of person. So Truth Social, you go in there, there's no left-wing talking points in there, right? There's no actual discourse where people are having true conversation. It's just echo chambers. And so what can happen is if something's created out of an absolute need by a certain group over a philosophy, it can mean that more people use that technology. So more criminals might be using Monero right now because there's no other options. But that's not the reason why Monero is a better money in terms of privacy. And now I want to quickly touch on what you said about businesses. Businesses cannot function without privacy. You're absolutely correct. If you have a business, you don't want your competitors knowing where you source your product from. You don't want them to know what your markup is. You don't want your customers to know that because they'll just cut you out of the picture. And then you don't want your workers to know how much each are getting paid. You can voluntarily do that if you would like, if that's a philosophy that you want to go. But fundamentally, you need to start at that privacy. And not only that, we in the Western world, we generally, I can say, have a pretty safe environment, generally speaking, where you're not going to get robbed unless you're really asking for it. But paying someone with your wallet, where you have a $10,000 NFT in there, and then the guy at the shop goes, "Hey, that guy just paid me. I can see instantly into his wallet. He's got a 10,000. He's walking around with it. Oi, boy!" And they send the boys around the back and beat the hell out of you and grab your phone. It's an absolutely ludicrous scenario where we think the future of money is absolutely transparent. It cannot be. It absolutely cannot be. So we need to make privacy default, and then allow that to come in. And now, what is your take on technologies like, because there's Bitcoin, which has a fair bit of privacy to the layman, because the layman looks at them and goes, I can't figure it out. Then, of course, software comes out like Chainalysis, or Chainalisnitch, as I like to call it. And of course, they can see and it's phenomenal what they can see and determine from that. Although there is also a shadow of a doubt in there. And in a court of law, a shadow of a doubt is quite an interesting concept.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty amazing what can be determined from the blockchain using software. And then there's obviously Monero and zero knowledge proofs and these sorts of technologies that truly try to obfuscate and hide through cryptographic means the ledger and allow people. So where do you think, like, Ethereum, for instance, is on my side of things the worst? Because in Bitcoin it's at least a little bit hidden, whereas Ethereum, it's so transparent, because even the layman can look and see what you have.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think with Bitcoin, I think fundamentally Bitcoin's value is in that it's perfectly transparent. I think that's where it's going to find its value. I think Michael Saylor pretty much says it without saying it and with saying it, right? He kind of makes it akin to owning property, right? That's really how he it's one of the ways he talks about Bitcoin, right? It's like owning a piece of Manhattan, right? And he's using that as an analogy, but it's actually as an analogy for why it's so valuable, because you're owning this piece of, this limited piece of land, right? Of virtual land. But the analogy goes beyond just the fact that it's limited. It's really that's what Bitcoin is. It's owning NFTs on a perfectly provable ledger, where it's very clear who has ownership of it, and it's keeping these deeds, and there's perfect provenance, and it's very easy to determine the ownership. And you could sit there on your ledger and you could own $1 million, $100 million, or $1 billion, and you could feel very secure in knowing that it's there and that you own it, and you can prove the ownership of it and move it around to who you want to move it around to. But it's going to be known to the world, and ultimately, I do see that as a valuable technology in and of itself, and I think that's really where Bitcoin's value proposition is. And I don't think it's in the use case as digital cash. It can be used for those purposes, but there's extra hoops you need to jump through. And you're always battling up against the chain analysis companies that are taking advantage of this attack surface that's there, that ultimately gives them an advantage against you, where they can essentially, with enough time and energy, unravel and figure out all the transactions. Especially given the case that most people that get into crypto, and Bitcoin in particular, are doing it through KYC, AML exchanges, centralized exchanges, where they're getting ID'd. That's what they're obtaining their Bitcoin, and then going off and entering into the Bitcoin ecosystem, where they're then tracked and traced thereafter. So I don't see Bitcoin really, ever being a good form of digital cash. And I think that's where something like Monero comes in. But I personally think it goes deeper than that. Like I said, I don't like to view it Monero as a privacy coin. I put Bitcoin and Monero kind of in the same space, competing ultimately for the same thing, and that's to be a self-propelling, unstoppable utility that can be used for purposes of transacting value that maintains its decentralized nature and can never be co-opted by any government or state. And I think Bitcoin's transparent ledger, like, as you know, I was giving you the pros, right? Like the fact
Yeah.
that I think there are benefits to that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think that gives the state and the powers that be an ability to co-opt it at the end of the day. Because like you said, what do they want? They want that eye, right? They want that panopticon where they can view all transactions. There's a ton of value in being able to do that. And Bitcoin serves it up to them on a platter. And so that's where, you know, I lean towards something like Monero, and I see its privacy being critical to making it resistant to being co-opted by the state.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, you know, the conversation has always been that, well, Bitcoin and Ethereum and such, they're like Trojan horses. You sort of wheel them in, you say they're not threatening.
Right.
If you can look past the headlines and everything that's gone on since the launch, you know, Ross Ulbricht and Silk Road and everything. Once you get past that and realize that you can track everything, it's like, oh, okay, it's not that bad. You know, we can check everything, and every company needs to have KYC and chain analysis integration and yada yada yada. And then it's only an upgrade away where we make all of that obsolete and allow true fungibility. But I don't know if it's possible in Bitcoin, because as Bitcoin moves, as every crypto gets a greater and greater network effect, it becomes more and more solidified in its code base and harder to upgrade without, you know, we saw the upgrades to SegWit in Bitcoin, it was almost impossible. And so although I think it comes a little bit down to culture. So the Ethereum culture in that community is a lot more about, hey, hard forks, go for it. Let's do it every week. It doesn't matter. As long as we're moving forward. And so, but what I find really fascinating, because we're building the standard.io on layer 2 Ethereum on Polygon, but we're building it with a lot of R&D on the zero knowledge proof side of stuff. So these are the roll-ups with ZK validity proofs, which again are kind of a Trojan horse, because they're using zero knowledge proofs in a way that they're more like validity proofs rather than hiding the transactions. But again, only a tweak away from allowing then privacy, which I think is really important. And like I stated in the start, where bankers think it's important. You want this privacy within it. So yeah, I'm interested to see the landscape between Monero, which I think is that base, that real foot in the ground, line in the sand currency that's saying privacy is extremely important for a currency, and this is our name stay. To that, compare that to something like Ethereum, which is the antithesis of no privacy. You know, just, hey, everyone see what everyone's NFTs and everyone's ERC20s are.
I mean, they are working on, you know, they do have privacy solutions, right? We saw Tornado Cash, right? That you know, didn't work out too well, but you know, there are and then there's Aztec is being worked on. We're trying to get them to come down to the Monerotopia conference, by the way. We're trying to highlight at that conference, not just, obviously it's going to be, you know, 80% Monero, and we're going to have devs from Monero, but we're also going to have other quote unquote privacy coins there and privacy tech projects demonstrating their technology and their techniques. I think it's good to get all these people in the same room, especially because ultimately the people that actually really, really believe in this stuff, it's a small group at the end of the day. Even among the you know, you go on Twitter, you see all these crypto people with the laser eyes. I mean, 90% of them, I don't think are don't have a cypherpunk bone in their body, right? They got pulled in with the Michael Saylor or whatever, the number go up, they got pulled into that whole meme, and they're not really there for the revolution. They're there for the revolution in that it's going to make them rich, but not in that it's going to create a means for a free and open society to exist in the digital age. I don't think a lot of people are thinking like that. But in these community of people that are interested into privacy coins, like me and you, and that see, I think it's unfortunately a small group among the crypto people. And so we're trying to bring all of them together at Monerotopia. But so yeah, I mean, Ethereum, yeah, it's very transparent in its basic architecture, but they're trying to create tools around that. But I think that's kind of analogous to Bitcoin. I don't see Bitcoin being any more private essentially than Ethereum. They're both synonymous, right?
Yeah. And what you ran for Congress a little while ago.
Yeah, 2020.
2020, yeah. And what was that like? Talk us through that journey of being someone that's advocating actual privacy in money, but also running for Congress. How did those two worlds collide, and what was the sort of reaction that you got?
Well, that's where I kind of get this anecdotal evidence that most people don't care about these issues. So like definitely, even in crypto, but outside of crypto, oh my God, like really nobody cares about it, man. I mean, because I talked to people day and night, right? Because trying to get them to vote for me. And I wouldn't bring up Monero unless like I had really kind of a window to bring it up. And I am obviously always looking for that window to bring up crypto and stuff. And in 2020, it was a little bit different time than it is now. Even though it didn't seem like that long ago, it was, I think now, but everybody knows Bitcoin now. Everybody knows crypto now, for better or worse, for good reasons or not. Even then, 2020, people knew, but they didn't know as well as they do now. But my point is, most people just don't care. They don't care about these things. You sit there and you talk to them. Oh, digital cash. They're gonna eliminate cash, and we need something to replace it. And the eyes just roll over. The eyes just glaze over. I think it's an abstract issue. We're here talking about the panopticon and this dystopia and CBDCs and how the government wants to control us. Most people's eyes roll when you talk about that. When I was running. I think even since then, though, there's been a pretty big change, and 2020 was part of that. In retrospect, I was doing it during it. I was the guy out there. I was against the lockdowns. I was very early being against very early. I got COVID in February of 2020. So when it first officially, whether it hit earlier, we don't know. But when it first officially hit like the New York area, I was literally one of the first to kind of get it.
Wow.
And because I got it, they ended up shutting down where I worked. Like I kind of was part of one of the dominoes that clicked off all the others.
Oh, geez.
Not that I'm proud of that, but it just is what it is. And I think part of that had to do with because I was out there campaigning. I had gotten the go like campaign for Congress. So I started going to all these events and, right off the bat. And that's when it was really starting to hit. So it was like, I was kind of like patient zero in where I'm from in Nassau County, hate to admit it. But I was because I experienced it on my own. I was like, it's bad. People get it's a flu. It's a bad flu. I got, it's not, let's shut down the entire world. And so I was like, I'm running for Congress. And the reason I ran for Congress was because of Monero, right? COVID hit as soon as I got the tap. So that wasn't even a thing. But once it happened, I was like, oh my God. I'm like, this is like, what is going on, people? So I was out there very early, and like people were, worse than rolling their eyes. I was getting cursed off. I was like, people were angry at me. They thought I was an idiot for not going along with the Joneses on it. And I proved to be correct, I believe. But my point is, I think if you go out there, even though it's, a couple of 3 years later, like I said, people know about crypto more, but they also, I think, are more concerned about tyranny more than ever. because they've experienced it firsthand. It was always a little bit more theoretical. We talk about it. Well, these things can happen. People now, they saw it happen. They saw how, you know, a small group of people were basically able to, on a global level, get everybody to agree to completely shut down their government. And they saw how some people ended up becoming a lot more powerful after it, and people's eyes are open. And I think it's really interesting that CBDCs is this thing that's coming down the pipe that everybody's watching it approach. It's like you see the meteorite coming. We're all watching it. And so I'm curious to see how that's going to play out, because I don't even know what we have that to compare to, where like everybody was anticipating this thing, and, you know, kind of there's a large group that's opposed to it fundamentally.
That's right. But they I think the vast majority see CBDCs as a simple upgrade to money rather than rather than what it is, which is an absolute takeover of everybody's freedoms.
Right. We, if anything, once again, what we learned from COVID is at the end of the day, people do just go along, right? So when the government says everybody stay home, everybody stayed home. When the government tells everybody to use a CBDC, everybody's going to do it, especially when they create incentives for them to do it. And it's like basically, and they mandate it through, you know, slowly boiling the frog, right? And you know, maybe not happen overnight, but 5-10 years.
Oh, not even. I think it'll, like, it doesn't take long. They'll just say, you know, oh, you get an extra $100 airdrop if you convert your bank account over to the CBDC bank account. And
right, the next stimulus, you won't be able to get it unless you have a CBDC, or you can get it the other way, but it's going to take you 6 extra months to figure out how to do it. As opposed to just, you know, downloading the app and boom, you got your stimulus check in CBDC form.
Yeah,
who's not going to do it? I'm going to do it. You're going to do it, right? I'm going to go convert it into Monero, but Joe Schmo is just going to go do it, right?
Yeah. No, but you're right. That, like, let's quickly go back onto the last 2 years, because the last 3 years, it was a really important time to wake people up. I never would have dreamt that media and the internet could be so controlled around one narrative. I never would have dreamt it, but there was no way you could. And actually, in some way, love him or hate him, you saw the start of it with Trump, where you saw a narrative about him just being bad, especially in Europe. That's all you saw. Google News. I remember opening up Google News. I thought, I just want to see if there's any positivity from the. You couldn't find it. It was just thread after thread of everything bad about Trump. Now, love him or hate him, you can't have a person that's only bad, right? So there has to be some, but it was the first where you could see that there was a narrative being twisted by especially big tech and controlled. Now, then you saw the COVID narrative coming in, where that was just so amazingly huge. It was an onslaught of fear and direction towards one goal, and the one goal was the jab. That was the goal: lockdown and jab. And
including your kids, right? It even got to that point where they're like, we got to vaccinate your 4-year-old.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Public messages. I live here in New York. You know, I mean, basically, there was through the public broadcasting system. You know, you turn on your TV. I don't watch normie TV, but when I would, it's there, and it's scary. It's there on repeat. Every other commercial, you know, and telling you how to, you know, where to go get your vaccine. I mean, the amount of effort that they were putting towards this. Even after like the COVID subsided, even after like it was gone, it was still got to get that vax.
Yeah,
get that vax.
Phenomenal. I mean, in terms of like business, they did a great job. Like, how could, like, the amount of logistics that the big pharma put in to not only create that in the US but globally. But I think what it comes down to, and the East Germans, living in Berlin for a long time, the East Germans, when the wall was still there, had a taste of this. And how it works is by making everybody the police of everybody, where everyone's yelling at everyone to get to get it, or to lock down, and they parrot the narrative. So you don't need the constant, you just need to put the fear in, and get everybody controlling everybody.
Right.
And
before you know it, your own mother is telling you, you better go get the vaccine.
literally,
oh, do you work for the state now? Are you? I mean, at your dinner table, you have 80% of your family against you.
And not just lightly against you. You probably aren't even at the dinner table.
Right. It was
because they didn't allow you. There's some really heartbreaking stories that I've read over the last 2 years, absolutely heartbreaking, of people giving birth without their fathers, people dying, their grandmothers dying without ever saying goodbye. I mean, the hole that leaves, of never being able to say goodbye to a loved one that you've been with for your entire life, is enormous. And what's the most fascinating, and we'll move on from this conversation in a minute, but what's so fascinating about it is that even now you cannot bring it up to people that, hey, they might be having adverse reactions because of a certain medication. They'll get instantly angry. Rather than being angry at what, or looking into, like, imagine if someone gets murdered and the police find the it's probably this. Why would you get angry at the notion that the police might say, here's some evidence that it might be this? But this is the first time where the brainwashing has been so hard over the last 2 years, because people were advocating it. They don't want to, they have this cognitive dissonance where they don't want to be wrong over the last 2 years, 3 years.
It's human psychology, right? Nobody wants to admit that they got completely played. Nobody wants to admit that.
It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. But let's quickly tap back into the world of Monero, because
they all relate. All these things relate, for sure.
They absolutely do. They absolutely do. What's coming up with Monero? Where are we at? What's the state of play there? Where is what's happening to the technology? The last I heard, it was expensive, and this is the sort of FUD that goes around. It's very slow and expensive and such. Are there what's the latest in the technology that's coming down the pipes?
Yeah, so as of now, Monero works very well as peer-to-peer cash for the amount of people that have a true need for it. It has no problem handling that. So most people on the dark markets have ported over to it, right? Like a lot of the vendors now request it over there. So it's naturally growing organically in line with the real demand for digital cash. Not everybody, has a use case for digital cash, but as people realize they do and they might benefit from it, Monero's there and it's working for them and it's scaling beautifully. I mean, right now I could send you 10 cents, 20 cents, $20 million, right? And it's going to cost the same amount. It's going to cost a third of a cent. And it's going to effectively get to you essentially instantly, right? Then you may have to, wait a couple of minutes for each block to confirm. But with the apps that are built now, there's Cake Wallet is the one that we always talk about. We're sponsored by them, but it's great. They have an iOS app, an Android app. There's Monero. There's a lot of others. And they're built in very, very nice, slick ways where it's just as easy, if essentially, to use as Venmo, but you're holding your own keys on your phone and you're not revealing your transaction or the amount you have to anyone. And it works very nicely. There is a lot coming down the pipe, though. Monero is going to be getting upgrades. Like you said, expensive. I guess you meant in terms of the data, like the transactions are heavy, right? So that was always one of the criticisms, right? So like a Monero transaction is effectively like 4 times heavier than a Bitcoin transaction. But you're getting so much more for it. Like apples to apples would be how heavy is a Bitcoin transaction if you're trying to send a private version of it, right? You basically have to send, two extra transactions to get a fungible Bitcoin transaction. So at that point, you're already just as heavy. But even that aside, Monero is scaling very well. There's efficiencies being added all the time. Even just the other day, Rucknium from the community, without going into details of the tech, but figured out how to propagate transactions a minute faster. That's huge. And everybody implemented it overnight, and it's already being seen as a fact. Bulletproofs was a major breakthrough that happened, and that basically is the encryption that allows range proofs to happen on a Monero transaction, so nobody can essentially double spend, right? So it's checking each Monero transaction cryptographically, and that was always an expensive thing to do. And there's this thing called bulletproofs that was invented, and it vastly cut down the size of the transaction and the speed. So there's always new developments, and big ones coming down the pipe are one is called Seraphis. That's being developed. It's going to take some time to implement it because the Monero community takes their time with the tech, right? They don't want to just be experimental. And that's going to be really where that's going to come into play is in the ring signature portion of Monero. So I don't know how familiar you are with the tech, but basically
a little bit, but I always go with that. Our listeners aren't that familiar.
Yeah. So for anybody listening out there, just break it down in simple terms. Monero has three basic technologies that obfuscate a transaction. So there's stealth addresses, which basically obfuscates the receiver. So there's no address to even go look up on the blockchain. If you showed me your Monero address and I send Monero to it, I can't even go look up that address on the blockchain, because basically what happens is when I go to send you the Monero, I'm reading your address, your stealth address that your address that you're showing me, and I'm using that information to generate a new address. Me as the sender, I'm generating it, and then I'm sending the Monero to that. It's not even on the blockchain, right? But then you are using your private key essentially to scan the blockchain and scan and find these cryptographically secured stealth addresses. So me as a sender, or an outside observer, there's no address to even go look up. So that obfuscates the receiver. There's confidential transactions, which obfuscates the amounts of a transaction, and that was invented by Bitcoiners. Stealth addresses too. I mean, stealth addresses was proposed by Satoshi Nakamoto in a Bitcoin forum. When he was talking about how to potentially make Bitcoin more private. He described stealth addresses, and he also described ring signatures. And ring signatures is what obfuscates the sender. So when you send a Monero transaction, it creates decoys, so you can't actually see who the true signer of the transaction is. And that's really probably the weakest component of Monero. The confidential transactions are encrypted. Stealth addresses are encrypted, but ring signatures, it's not really truly encryption. It's using kind of this roundabout probabilistic way to obfuscate who the true signer of a transaction is. And it gets better the more decoys, fake signers you add. And so to have a bunch of fake signers, fake decoys, that makes the transaction very heavy. So Monero constantly has to make that trade-off, right? And only added so many decoys, effectively enough in the belief of those who are the big brains behind this, that it's good enough to obfuscate the sender and not being able to figure out who it is. But obviously, as more people are trying to unwind these transactions and more people are observing them, it's a constant battle. So you want to decrease their ability to do so. So Monero is always looking to improve that component. And so what Seraphis does is it like kind of I wouldn't say exponentially, but it in a very large way. So we're going from, I think we're at 16 rings. We just recently increased from 11 to 16, and Seraphis will take us to, I don't know, a couple of hundred in terms of ring size. And at that point, it's statistically you know, might as well have an infinite number is what the mathematicians are telling me in terms of what that effectively means in terms of probability and trying to figure out who the true sender is. So that's a big development that's coming down the pipe, and that's Seraphis. And then there's just a lot being built outside of the ecosystem. There's Sarai, which is a DEX, decentralized exchange similar to Thorchain. Are you familiar with Thor?
Yeah, I looked a little bit into it, but not deeply.
So for anybody who's listening who's familiar with Thor, it's very similar to that. It uses liquidity pools, but Thor balked at adding Monero. Actually, a lot of time and money was invested in it, and there was a part of that community that very passionately wanted to add it. Because if a decentralized exchange is ever going to have a use case, I mean, a great use case is for people to essentially anonymously, without KYC, being able to obtain Monero, right? And so Monero, it has been delisted from a lot of exchanges. So this would be a beautiful way to have an unstoppable on-ramp to Monero. So there's a lot of demand there, but Thorchain didn't want balked at adding it because I think they thought it might hurt the value of the underlying currency, because they might get some, I don't know, pressure from the regulators, whatever their thinking was. So Sarai is being worked on and invented by somebody in the, was invented by somebody in the Monero community. And that's going to be a Monero-based decentralized exchange that works very similar to Thor. There's Havino, which is another decentralized, essentially, exchange that's being worked on. There's a lot. Monero has never been more robust than it is. I've been involved for quite some time, even on Twitter. I mean, I used to be like a lone voice out there, and now there's just an army of very passionate people. And what's exciting about it is they're never, very rarely talking about it and tweeting about it in terms of, oh, you look, the price of Monero just went up 10%. When is it going to hit at that? Like price talk really isn't what's being spoken about. It's about building a circular economy outside of state control and using Monero for it. That's what the real excitement is. And we're seeing in real time, that's what people are working on. And because Monero, gets delisted from exchanges and has to put, is some companies see it as a risk. It's really forced the ecosystem to figure out how to exist outside of the legacy system. So Monero is making, I think, a lot of strides in that area where other coins are kind of lagging because they're still, living off the big daddy state, right? They like Bitcoin very much exists within the state fiat system. Most people value their Bitcoin in fiat. The vast majority of people, like I said, get it through centralized exchanges, whereas Monero, a lot of people are kind of forced to figure out how to get it outside of the system, and then to live outside of that system and find people that are willing to accept and use it. So it's exciting times because it's growing organically in that way.
This was always the discussion around Bitcoin as well. It's like, once regulators shut everything down, then it'll lose value. But really, it was built to be out of that. It's just that the massive amounts of value that comes in because of these on and off ramps. How do you think regulation, talking about that space, how do you think regulation will play a part in this, or if any? Do you think it just doesn't care and the market will find a way around these sorts of ludicrous rule sets that have been put in place by politicians that don't understand anything about money, let alone why privacy is important? How do you think Monero will deal with harsher and harsher regulations?
By continuing to do what it's doing, which is ignoring them and building an ecosystem that can't be stopped by governments, right? They could create rules all day and night, but can they stop people from using it? Now, practically speaking, it is having an effect, right? I think it's, it affects people's ability today to ape into Monero. It's not, especially here in New York. There's no way in New York through a centralized exchange to connect your bank account and go buy Monero. I mean, I talk to people all the time. They're like, "Oh yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah. How do I get it?" I'm like, "Well, I could send you some." They're like, "I can't get it on Coinbase." No, you can't get it. Is there any New York exchange? Like, no, you can't. They're like, "Oh, okay. Well, what do I do?" So it's definitely having an effect. People that even want, they can't ape into it. And so I think Monero, it's being affected by that. But like I said, my answer before, the way it's dealing with it is building decentralized on and off ramps and building an ecosystem outside of the current system. So it's making it perhaps slower for those that are in the fiat world to port over to it. They have to take a stop through Bitcoin land, perhaps. Maybe they have to go buy Bitcoin or Litecoin and then swap into it. But that allows Monero to really just focus on building the more truly decentralized system outside of the state system, and that's how it's reacting. And my prediction is that Monero is here to stay. That it can't be stopped. That there'll be some tumultuous times in dealing with regulators, but really it's not a matter of technology. It's a matter of people, just like COVID, right? It's a matter of people realizing that they don't have to comply. And so I think, certainly within the Monero community, there's that strong message. People like, that's what crypto's about. We're not here to ask for permission to use cryptocurrency. We're here to build something where we don't have to ask permission, that anybody can just use it in an unstoppable way. And so I think it's forcing Monero to also advertise that message and get the community, crypto community at large, to learn about that and realize that these true crypto cannot be stopped. The only thing that can stop it is people believing that governments can stop it, and they get scared out of it.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. Before we wrap up, I do want to touch on maybe I'd love to hear some real world examples of where you've seen Monero or privacy coins, to use that term, used to make a positive impact on individuals or businesses, or where you've seen a true example of, wow, that's really helped.
So yeah, there's this cocaine dealer on the dark where I personally see, well, we have a business called Gratuitous, right? And that's a way for people to buy direct from farm goods like coffee and eggs and things like this. And we've tied in the ability to send tips in Monero that go directly to the people that produce the stuff. So like coffee was the thing we started with. And so that's just a small example. But what it allows us to do, it allows us to sell these products directly for Monero, and it allows people that buy them to send tips in digital cash. They can send $1 to the Guatemalan farmer that picked their beans. That's my personal example. Other examples, I think it's just people that are using it to sell stuff on the internet. That's people that are using it to work remotely and get paid in Monero. Anybody anywhere. We have people probably, I don't even probably want to, we have people all over the world that do things for us for Monero. And we send them Monero, we pay them Monero on a task basis, but there's no figuring out how to send it to their bank account, and they live in whatever country. But I have people all over the world that are helping us out with things, and we pay them in Monero, and they get the payment instantly. And there's no dealing with the legacy banking system. I mean, in running our Monero businesses, we also still have to deal with the legacy system, and that is by far the most onerous part of all our transacting. And so,
I just want to add this, that it was only maybe, I would say, 40 years ago, where the governments didn't have the ability to look at everything you were doing with your money. How taxes worked is the threat of you going to prison if they find something that you're not declaring or whatever.
Right.
So to say that, oh, but how will governments be able to get money if they can't see anything? Look, it still goes back to that same concept of the government's just going to use the threat of force against you if you aren't, being upfront. So that's the risk that people will take. But we don't need people to, it's a very new thing where governments just look in and take what they want. So I'm not saying it's good. But I'm just saying, when people say, yeah, but how will the roads be built? Whatever, that's a whole nother conversation. But it's more like, look, the governments will do what they do, and they'll just go back to what they did 40 years ago. And that's, to say, look, you better be telling the truth.
Right.
That's what it goes back to.
Innocent until proven guilty, the Fourth Amendment, all that stuff. I don't think taxes should be, we're all using a CBDC, and whatever the government thinks you owe is automatically deducted from your account. Not because that sounds great in theory, but so does putting a camera in every single person's home so we can see if any crime is going to happen. Also sounds great in theory, right? I'd love to live in a world where there's no crime, and it's very easy to solve that problem. We put cameras in every single home and have the police forces monitoring them. It'd be great. There'd be no crime. How could you possibly be against that? So you want murders to happen? You're against that?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, you're not, right? Because you want that liberty. So same with money, right? So there is liberty in being able to transact freely without the government's perfectly surveilling it. And if that means that they're going to have to put in a little extra work and go through some procedural process to obtain their taxes, good for them. Let them do that so that we can keep our liberty. And so, I mean, people shouldn't be shocked by the fact that we're going to live in this world where governments have to ask us to opt into paying taxes. That's the way it's always been. And then they'll do what they need to do. They have their rules. If I went out tomorrow with Monero and bought a Lamborghini, I'm sure I'm going to be getting a letter in the mail if I didn't pay capital gains tax on my Monero from when I got it to when I made that purchase. I very much expect a letter in the mail, right? I can't go out and buy a house tomorrow with Monero that I bought in 2017 and not pay capital gains tax on it. So to say like all these things are going to go, they're not. People are going to have to deal with the government. But what it does is it gives the individual the power, and it gives them the advantage, and then the governments have to go ask us for permission, just like we have a front door in our house that they're not allowed to just walk through the door. They have to knock and ask for permission before they come in.
It's the fundamental of the cypherpunk creed, which is transparency for the powerful, privacy for the weak. And that's really what it comes down to is, look, we need privacy for the weak. Otherwise we just get taken over. They have better weapons, they have better everything. You need privacy. It's for anyone that wants to keep up with the great work that you do, and with your podcast and your tweets and everything else, where do they catch you?
Yeah, so at Douglas Tuman on Twitter. My our YouTube channel, me and my wife Sunita, is Monero Talk. So just Google that, you'll find that. And then we do a weekly show where we interview typically people that are working on Monero related stuff. It's like an hour-long convo, kind of like this. And then we do a weekend show, which is more of a community-based show that anybody can call in, and we do the news, and that's called Monerotopia. And that's also on the Monero Talk YouTube channel. And then from that, we've created a conference. So we did the first one last year in Miami, and it was a great success. We did it alongside the Bitcoin conference. And that worked out well. The reason we did that because we figured people would be in town for the Bitcoin conference. They can just come over, it'd be less risk on our part. But what we realized is like literally everybody that was there didn't even go to the Bitcoin conference. They just came in for the Monero thing. So we're like, you know what? Screw Miami. It's too expensive. So this year we're doing it down in Mexico City in the Roma district. We found a very nice outdoor venue in this community center. And it's going to be really a 2.5 day conference. And it's just going to be amazing. The vibe is, you know, cypherpunks, people that believe in digital cash hanging out, talking about, you know, how are we going to get this up and running? That's the vibe of Monerotopia. We kept it super cheap. And yeah, that I keep saying because that's really what we're shilling right now. We're trying to get the word out on it. I think Monero, because of the privacy aspect of the community, I mean, a large sector of the Monero community like doesn't use Google. They won't even go on YouTube. You know, there's the Monero community. It's like a glacier, right? You know, it's hidden. So I take any moment I can to really get the word out about stuff because the word doesn't travel fast in Monero because most people are kind of like off the grid. There's a lot of off the grid people.
Right.
But yeah, check it. It's monerotopia.com and come on down. It's in May 5th, 6th, and 7th.
May 5th, 6th, and 7th.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Tons of amazing speakers, man. It's like we got a lot of Monero devs. We have a lot of other privacy projects that are participating. We have you know, then we have like the freedom fighters. You know, we have Jeff Berwick. You know, I'm sure you've heard of Jeff.
Jeff. Yeah, he's a friend of mine.
So Jeff is going to be there. He's turned into quite the big Monero guy, and he lives in Mexico City. He'll be a part of it. So we have a very nice, interesting, hardcore vibe going on there. So
awesome. Yeah, really important. You know, it's interesting because people like Amir Taki, for instance, who've been in Bitcoin for years, they go really to the extreme. Like, I'm going to call everything dark wallet and dark this, and you know, and I think it serves a purpose because it makes people go, whoa, that's intense. Let's pull it back to the middle, where it's already private. And it sort of has this sort of so it's good to have the extremes, the middles, and the other side, and you have great conversations and figure out where this takes it. And the free market will take us hopefully to freedom, which is what we want.
And yeah, Amir might be down there actually. DarkFi is participating.
Great.
Lunar DAO is participating. Rachel Rose, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's most likely, she was at the first one. She'll be at this one. Mir, we're trying to get him. He might come as well.
Cool. Awesome. Oh yeah. I mean, I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully I can make it. Thank you very, very much, Douglas. It's been fantastic talking, and yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye on everything Monero.
Cheers, man. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Ciao.
Cool.